So I know Andy's got some planter activity going, and so does Gary. Is there anybody else around here that knows about planters? Or is this foreign to you guys? Foreign. I don't want to bore people too much talking about it. Mike may talk about it as well. But interested in adopting some of the planter technology into our mainstream agriculture in this area. So using it for small grains in particular. This afternoon, Mike's going to talk about using this planter for canola. And a lot of more and more people are interested in it. Mostly because of, why do you guys think?
Seed cost.
Yeah, that's the one that jumps out often, is seed cost. I'm not really a farmer, so I care more about the agronomy side of it, but certainly what this does is a much more precise job at planting, and it's very common in corn. We'll go look at the corn. The way that people manage corn is a lot more intensive than we do our typical small grains type agriculture. And I think we may be able to adopt and adapt some of that technology and agronomy knowledge to our cropping systems, and also not just save on seed costs, but probably gain on some agronomy benefits, so some better yields, better seed placement. These are vacuum planters. They use plates like this, and it's the opposite of an air seeder. So it sucks air through these plates, and every individual seed is put onto that little hole and very precisely dropped out of this disc opener. After the seed is placed, we've got the seed firmer, and it presses the seed down into the ground rather nicely, and then a closing reel. So what that allows you to do is really precisely place your seed. So on a corn farmer will talk about seeds per acre instead of bushels per acre. So they're talking about 30,000 seeds per acre, and they're going to fine-tune that placement to optimize tiller management. They only want one cob per plant, and if you go too light, it's going to allow the crop to tiller, and then you're going to have 2 or maybe 3 heads in a cob, and that really affects yield because corn likes to compete with each other. So it's really about optimum distribution across the field to fine-tune to even the genetics itself. So certain varieties will perform better at different planting populations. We haven't really delved into that world with wheat. We basically throw it in the air cart and seed. But in this world, they're finding that it really makes a big difference. So it's all about planting population versus row spacing. The other thing that this planter does really nicely is depth control. And as a disc opener, it has a parallel link. So this is the parallel linkage right here. And what's interesting about the parallel link is with a disc opener, if you just had the one arm seeder, this disc will kind of ride along the soil and just bump up and down, and it doesn't really penetrate into the soil all that well. As soon as you throw a two parallel link, you end up almost pushing that disc. So you're able to get into the ground, do a much better job of seed placement. So in our earlier work, we're seeing lots of benefit to really precise depth control. These big packer wheels help keep that planter really precisely and doing not just a good job at placing one seed after the other within a given distance from each other, but awesome depth control, and it really follows the contours of the land really well. So now the downside. These planters were not designed, honestly, for zero tillage. And even from last year, I was in love with this planter. It did just an amazing job. This year, I'm just sort of lukewarm on it. And I think a lot of it had to do with how hard the soil was this year. Did you guys find that at times it was hard, really hard crust on the soil? And nobody?
Last year mine was.
Last year your was? And did you have your planter last year?
Yeah.
Did you have trouble with it then?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we had.
No, I've got a Deere.
You've got a John Deere. So I think that, there are things that need to be adjusted on these planters to work, I think, better under more conditions that we're used to. Some of the things, basically the only thing that we did to make this a zero-till drill was add these residue cleaners in the front. These are Yetter residue cleaners. They're supposed to move the trash. I think we could set that a little more aggressively to even do some light tillage with it. That might help. But there's weight issues as well. These springs here, that's really the down pressure, and this is a pretty pitiful little down pressure spring on this planter. You can get them with airbags that will automatically adjust the pressure. You can adjust it that way. Basically, it's a lot more work to set these drills properly and to get them to work under different environments. So if we were in early on a nice zero till where there's lots of moisture, it works great. But otherwise, there's some work that needs to be done to really be able to bring the benefits of this technology to more mainstream agriculture in southern Alberta or Western Canada.
With the fine seeds like canola, is there static issues? Or how do they overcome?
We've never had the issue with the static on canola. I have heard that can be an issue, so some folks are using brushes to try to clean the seeds and avoid the static. Speed is an issue. With these planters, you're just going to have to slow down a little bit. So, you can't seed at 7 miles an hour because it gets spinning too fast, and the seed doesn't really have a chance to either get on the plate or it doesn't come off properly. So that's a bit of a downside for a lot of people, but I do know that the folks that have been using planters on canola have been, for the most part, pretty happy. A good majority of the seed production in southern Alberta has now moved to the planter technology and are quite happy with it in that sense. But, it's not all there yet, but I think there's a lot of potential. I'm going to let Mike talk about the canola side a little bit more. Any questions about the planter? So I'm going to talk a little bit about corn now. That's the main reason that we got the planter, was to study dryland grain corn production. And the reason that we're interested in this is mostly because the big corn companies like Monsanto and Pioneer are breeding low heat unit corn varieties that are suitable for Western Canada. They've set up shop here in Alberta with what they're calling ultra low heat unit breeding facilities, and they basically have massive ambitions of expansion of corn acres, as high as 8 to 9 million acres in Western Canada in a short amount of time. So they can do the breeding side of it. To me, especially in southern Alberta, how are we going to fit this into our zero-till cropping systems? As we mentioned before, the planters, they have some issue. They're basically saying you need a planter to plant corn. But how is it going to behave in our environment? There are other parts of the U.S. where they're doing dryland corn that's similar, like in South Dakota, that doesn't get a lot of moisture. The first thing that I learned in playing with corn is that it's actually incredibly drought tolerant. That's a bit of a misconception regarding corn, because we tend to see corn under irrigation and for silage. That's been the best way to adapt corn first and foremost in Alberta. But the dryland side of things is, first of all, what are some other benefits of corn? We've got some hot temperatures coming here. Is this a type of crop? I'm looking for something that starts with C. Ends with 4. So corn is a C4 crop. We have a lot of C4 weeds around here, so that tells us that we're in an environment that those types of crops can flourish. So basically they do a better job of using the heat that's available to produce crops. So as a C4 crop, this next 3 weeks is actually not too bad for corn, although it doesn't like it too hot either. When it gets much hotter than 35, it starts to shut down as well. I'm so far very impressed with its drought tolerance ability. So now what that means too is if we're getting ourselves into a drought type condition, that planting population by row spacing is going to become pretty darn critical to nail down, because if we have too many plants in the area and it's got too many tillers and we run out of resources, then we're out of a crop. So that's what this study is, and I know it does look a little ugly here because we've left the pathways seeded. We haven't trimmed everything up, mostly because the folks at Pioneer were telling me that corn is such a sensitive crop that we need to make sure that we're managing the edge effects. So the first thing I'm going to do actually here is let you wander through. If you don't mind, don't kick the corn over while you're doing it. Just be a little bit gentle, because these are research trials. But I want you to walk through, take a look, and go to go to the corn that you think looks the best. And we'll have a talk once we've stopped there. So
You want to hit the pop and spacing trial?
we can go anywhere in this corn. So we'll wander for 2 minutes.
Because this one's the variety, I think, right here.
Yeah, we're gonna go right past this variety because everybody's gonna see that nicer looking corn over there anyways, right?
Yeah.
So when you guys walk through the variety trial, it's surprisingly uniform. Hey, there's lots of different varieties with different heat units, and you don't see all that much difference. We get to this trial, and there's a lot of differences. So this is the one probably where I'd like you to just walk out and say, if this was my farm, this is what I'd want my corn to look like. We're gonna stop at this plot right here because it looks pretty good, eh? So the first thing, what do you guys notice in it? It's taller,
More leaves.
lots of leaves. You almost have a bit of a canopy closure here. Yeah.
Spacing?
We're a little bit early, so we can't look at cob development yet, but one thing that we're always trying to do in our agriculture, is steal this one from Bob, is we want to be able to intercept as much solar radiation as possible, starting, obviously at the longest day of the year. So we're already past the longest day of the year, and if we don't have that canopy closure by that time, then we're missing out on good photosynthetic opportunity. This one's canopied over nicely, and it's actually on a 20-inch row spacing. So corn in the corn belt grows faster, they got more heat. They tend to be on 30 inches, even 36. Whereas with our condensed growing season, it's likely that we're gonna have to play around. So I talked to Dwayne Beck out of South Dakota, and he says, Ken, I'm gonna bet 20-inch row spacing, 20,000 seeds per acre is going to be the best for Southern Alberta. Now, funny enough, our data so far is showing that there's definitely an advantage to the 20-inch row spacing. However, we haven't maxed out on yield as we increase seeding rate. This plot right here is at 30,000 seeds per acre. And you'll notice that that's the distance. They even talk about the distance between plants. I haven't fully versed myself in that lingo, but you can see there's probably about 8 inches between each plant here, right? And the population will actually change the thickness of the stalk as you're walking along. Look at the stalk thickness, you'll notice big differences. But to me, this is pretty interesting that very simple concepts such as row spacing and planting populations, when you look around here, it makes a huge difference. So what that means is the agronomy practices that we employ will impact your bottom line. So that's the point of this study. Yes, sir? These ones are all the same variety right here. Seeded. That trial there was a little bit later. We had to bring in a different cone planter for that trial. So it also had, this was the monosem, that was not. Although these we got in pretty early this year. Normally they talk about not seeding your corn until 15th of May. I said baloney to that. And we tried to get 2 inches deep with the corn. I was having a lot of issues with that planter, even at this site, in being able to get it deep enough. So we had it set as deep as it would go. No, I don't think it was hairpinning. It was literally, this May we had 30-degree weather and we had rain. And I think what happens with that sort of combination of heat and moisture is it was just a lot harder crust on the soil to be able to break through. And we'll be able to see as we walk through some spots where the corn actually didn't get planted deep enough, and that was the issue. So data so far is actually showing not a response curve, but a linear response to planting population. So far, I would probably invest in more seed on the dryland corn, and I'd worry less about nitrogen fertilizer. Seeing as we're not shooting for 200 and 300 bushel corn on dryland, it's actually pretty efficient at nitrogen. No different than canola, to be honest with you. So our response to nitrogen has been limited so far in the work that we've done. This outside row, you're seeing issues. That's tractor tire compaction. So even that tire is causing issue on getting appropriate seed to soil contact and. Yeah.
Our corn harvester just harvests the middle.
We're only harvesting the inside 2 rows. Yep. So those are sacrificial lambs. If you want to kick a corn plant, kick an outside row. So this is a good spot where we've had some issues with the planter itself. So these little plants, basically this was a depth control issue. And once you have any variation in a corn plant, these are useless. They basically won't amount to anything. Any other questions so far?
Ken, what's the rooting depth of corn?
Never dug one up, but as it being pretty drought tolerant, I suspect it's got good rooting depth. Does anybody know here?
I can go get you a shovel if you want to start digging.
We can start digging, yeah.
No, what's this wee stuff?
Yeah.
I don't want to dig in your plots.
Yeah. I'll be the first to admit I'm a novice to corn growing, and that's the point, is we're trying to adapt it, trying to learn how to work the zero-till side of things. So this type of an issue is probably always going to be an issue, and I'm sort of leaning, unless you're one of these guys that are really ultra low disturbance, like the stripper header, you've always got good soft mellow soil, that we're going to have to experiment with the strip tillage side of things like they do in Eastern Canada and in the States. So what the strip tillage does is it's basically an implement that cultivates in a narrow band so that you're loosening that soil up so the planter can do a better job. We don't have time, but there is another corn plot you might have seen when you came up at the beginning. If you want to stop it there on your way out, that one is a crop sequence trial. So as we mentioned, we want to try to be able to figure out how to fit corn into our rotations. You know, there's issues that we're concerned about as far as fusarium management, like Drew talked about. But where does it fit in a rotation? If we're not going to do any strip tillage and we're going to do zero till, we found that seeding into corn residue was a challenge. The seeder just didn't do a good job going through that heavy trash. The wheat residue was a bit of an issue. Did really, really well after peas and lentils. But the worst it did was against canola, after canola and mustard. Does anybody know why? Why would it do badly after corn or after canola or mustard? Yeah, it's because of that mycorrhiza. So they're both non-mycorrhiza crop. Those are the fungi that help the plant uptake phosphorus. So even though we would have put 3 gallons an acre of liquid phos with the seed, very visual and yield limiting differences in not having that mycorrhiza. So I would never recommend planting corn after either of those 2 crops. Yeah. So what we did see this year, and we didn't see it last year on that sequence trial, we did the sequence trial both under conventional tillage and zero tillage. So we would have worked up that residue. And this year, the plots that we rototilled up, they look a lot better than the zero till plots, especially under those crops with the high residue. However, last year we had a 5 bushel advantage, probably a 10 to 15% yield advantage by the zero till side of things. This year, it just really seemed to help mellow that soil up and get the plant up to a good start. So those are some of the issues that we'll have to work out to be able to do a better job of planting corn in a dryland scenario. Well, that's what I said. We did seed placed phosphorus. As far as a inoculate type thing, I haven't heard that it's effective. This has sort of been a well-known effect with corn. I don't think that people actually realize the impact because they'll seed a field and it may look good, unless you have it side by side.
So are we having that with other cereals after
I don't think as badly, no. I think corn is particularly sensitive to it. Yeah. You're going to pick out the ugliest plot, the one that you'd make fun of your neighbor if you saw it. Let's go look at it. Let's see. What do you guys notice about this plot compared to the one that we were just at?
You don't have as many plants up.
That's perfect. We have actually half as many plants. So the seeding rate here is 15,000 seeds per acre. The one that we just came from was 30,000. There's another big difference here.
Quite a bit more variation.
Spacing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gary?
There's more variation in plants too, because you get quite a few little.
Yeah.
Yeah. So spacing, this is now on the 30-inch row. Now you can see we still haven't got, we're not even close to the canopy closure in this plot. We have definitely variation. And again, I think that's really more to do with the planter not being able to do its proper job. I don't think it has to do with the row spacing or the population. However, when you're at half the population, one miss makes a bigger difference now. So now you'll see the plants, they're more about 12, 14 inches apart. So one miss leaves a pretty big gap here.
It's a big stalk though.
Stalks, yeah, if you look at the stalks, they're super thick. These will probably tiller a lot more. You'll have the multiple cobs, and then there's issue. One of the other things about corn production that I'd like to mention that we've learned too is on the harvest management side of things, we need to be able to probably harvest them a little bit on the wetter side. And that is going to require likely better grain drying facilities. So if we want to really make a good go at dryland grain corn production, that's another important thing to consider, that you might need to have better drying facilities. However, if we learn from our friends to the north with all of their issues in harvesting, I think grain drying sales have been pretty positive this year. Pretty good guess? Yeah. Yeah, I think, are there any other questions about corn?
This type of corn then, is this grazing, grain?
This is a grain corn variety. This is a lower heat unit variety, so it's about a 2,000 to 2,100 heat unit variety. Now Medicine Hat gets around 2,400 heat units. I think it's going to be a bit of a balance choosing both variety. And when you talk to the corn guys, corn varieties actually change faster than canola. So that's a tough world to play in. I suspect we'll be a little bit slower because we're on the low heat unit side of things. But being able to adapt the varieties to the environment is going to be a bit of a challenge, and everybody's going to have different stories. I found that even with corn companies, their heat unit measure isn't standard across companies. So you might have a 21 heat unit corn from Pioneer, and it's different than a 21 heat unit from Monsanto. So that's another thing to keep in mind, and just work with a trusted retailer there to find out what works best. So I think Gordon Frank is the guy that works mostly around here for Pioneer. Yeah. Any other last minute questions, because we're just about out of time for my session?
What did you say the heat unit was on this?
2,100. They're now getting into 1,900 heat unit corn as well. So it's about a 70-day corn. Okay, well thanks, and we're gonna move over to Howard now and talk about mustard.